is E&P Reports, a vodcast from editor and publisher. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And this episode sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide understand the need to accelerate its growth now. Plus, traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way. IQ Audience Plus is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers media companies to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income now with IQ Audience Plus. Visit townnews.com EP today to learn more. And welcome, I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. Quick housekeeping, listening to us on your favorite podcast platform or getting dizzy while Lee's moving his camera around, by all means, please follow us if you can. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, right below the screen, there's a subscribe button. Bang that and hit the bell to the right. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. I've got a good forum here right now. Faces that may be familiar to you, of course. We have David Chavrin. You are the CEO of the New News Media Alliance. You come to us, obviously, from the Washington, D.C. area. Am I correct, sir?
Yes, you are correct, Mike.
And of course, we have our friend Lee Wolverton. Lee, you are editor-in-chief of HD Media Group. Is that the proper title, sir?
Yeah, that works.
And that's obviously West Virginia based. The reason, Lee, I've known you for many years, but you also were the one that allowed us to release the first story on the antitrust legislation against Facebook and Google that your company started, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's obviously grown since then. And of course, Gretchen Peck, our contributing editor here at E&P, who's been chasing this story now for a very, very long time. Why don't you kick this off first, Lee?
Well, I think that one of the things that I noted in our conversation, Mike, that you and I had recently, and I've written about here for our products, is what's happening to advertising revenue. It really explains why we have the model we have and what's happened to the model. From 1962 to 2005, newspaper industry advertising revenues increased 40 of 44 years, from $3 billion roughly to $49.8 billion. Last year, according to the Pew Research Center, revenues fell to $8.83 billion. That's an 82% drop in just 16 years. That's a stunning drop. And if the trends hold, we'd be projected to hit zero in 5 years. So it shows us that we are in a state of crisis and we need to respond, and we need more than tax credits. We need to attack the problem, and that is that we've been choked off on digital advertising revenues by two companies operating in a monopoly.
Let me make sure that's understood that you're discussing total advertising revenue, correct?
Correct.
And you're discussing that across all spectrums of media, correct?
Newspapers.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But David, if I can bring you in, because you talk to others in broadcast and what have you, we're not the only ones getting choked by the Facebook and Google taking all that money off the table locally, correct? I mean, it's
no, as a matter of fact, there are more, particularly with you see with TV, for example, with cord cutting, it's all of us are going to be living off this thing very soon, and that the advertising around those things are controlled by two companies. There's a couple of important points here. The antitrust cases that Lee's involved with that are getting more publishers, that is not about Google, by the way, having a better product, right? Just a better, cheaper product. That is about the fact that Google controls the sell side platforms, the buy side platforms, the exchanges in the middle. Google also participates in those markets and collects data from all of them, right? So that you have it's great to have a better product, but it's also, what's even cooler? Owning all sides of a market. That's even better competitive advantage. And so that case is about that competitive circumstance. And then more broadly, we have the question of how do these platforms utilize our content, monetize it, and not return value? And that's an even bigger question.
Okay, let's get into that in a second. I mean, let's first, before we get into what licensing is all about and all that, let's first talk about the perfect storm. Lee, you and I had this lengthy conversation on this, when we were discussing this last week. The perfect storm is there's no question through digital disruption that the news publishing industry lost a lot of verticals we used to live off of. Whether that's good or bad, right or wrong, maybe we should have been the first Craigslist. Those days are done. We do not have the classified verticals we used to have to survive, or now the insert business we used to have that helps support newsrooms. Then add to that perfect storm, Google and Facebook taking 70% of local advertising revenue. See, Lee, you were talking just newspapers and digital. Local advertising revenue as a whole is now off the table for just about anybody trying to get any local dollars, is now being sucked up. Add to that what David just said, which is now they own the data, which is very interesting. So they're not only taking the advertising dollars, they own the entire mechanism of how the content's being found. And then we could throw into that for another discussion, because we don't have a lot of time today to go into this, the hedge funds that are now squeezing the newsrooms even more. So we've got this perfect storm now where local journalism is dying in some cities. Let's start there. Is that okay? I mean, Gretchen, you wrote about this. We now live in a world where there's these terms called news deserts, right? And those news deserts are occurring, and there's data, Dave, you know this, that doesn't this mean that these towns start to fail? They start to have less participation. There's legislation that sometimes goes through that the taxes aren't being monitored. Am I saying this correctly, David? I mean, let's just set the stage first, that with all this going on, towns are losing their local voices. Am I correct?
Yeah, first of all, there's a number of studies about what happens to towns economically, bond ratings and the rest when you lose quality local journalism. But also, I've always said the future of fake news, misinformation, is local, meaning people care about what's happening in their communities. They want to know what's happening in the world. What we've seen in these places is when you take out professional journalism, when you remove people whose job it is to professionally produce journalistic content, people's curiosity about their communities is still there. What fills the void is crazy, self-interested, blogosphere kind of nuttiness that actually tears communities apart. Right?
That's right. I love that analogy, because in a desert, people are thirsty. They're thirsty for news. So Gretchen, we reported on this at ENP, right? There's the weirdos start coming in, and then everything starts falling apart in the community, correct?
Indeed. We have all of these special interest type publications that sort of mask themselves as traditional news sources. But they really have an agenda.
Exactly. So now let's paint the picture, Lee. There's the perfect storm. Now we have an industry of journalists that need to support. They need to be supported. The newsroom must survive, right? And we are in a place now where the news they create and put out into the digital world is getting exploited by the same people that are sucking the dollars out, thus the antitrust case. Am I getting this? I mean, this is why your company stood up to it, because, okay, I was a disc jockey in the 80s. I was telling this to Dave, and I said, I remember when I played a song on the radio, we had to compensate the composer. It's called music licensing. If I steal a picture from Google Images and throw it on my website, I can get nailed now, because it's a licensed piece of property. Do I have this? So I always thought it went back to radio, David. I mean, I was telling you, this must be a radio thing, right? Music licensing started with radio. Anybody that wrote a song wanted to make money because the radio station was selling advertising around the song. You corrected me. What is the history of music licensing, David?
The first music license was attached to player piano rolls, right? So, but since, music was a print business in the 19th century, right? They controlled their distribution. Recording devices disrupted how you distribute it. And the music licensing, which we've all assumed has gone back to the time of the Romans, was really a system of compensation developed in response to a technological disruption of distribution. Weirdly, while that started with player piano rolls, that same system applies to Spotify, right? And has sustained the industry for 100 years. So there was a whole new distribution system, and then you had to develop ways to return the value back to the people who created the content.
There you go. So Lee, you're running a newsroom. You're writing stories left and right, and you're creating this exclusive content that you push out. And that click that Facebook and Google get from it is massively important to their revenue. What you're saying is that the composer should be compensated. Is that the basis of all this, Lee?
Exactly. Yeah. And I should mention, by the way, that I'm joined in here in my office by the president of our company, Doug Scaff Jr., and the managing partner, Doug Reynolds. And really, he's the guy who got this going. He's the one who said when we met here in January, he had zero faith in the legislative process. And it's thank goodness for him, because I'll tell you, there aren't a lot of us out here fighting the good fight. I was thinking while you were talking earlier, I wrote over the weekend about us suing West Virginia University over open meetings violations. And clearly, they don't think they have to subject themselves to the law because newspapers have lost their power. And one of the things, that's something we're still fighting a good fight here. We sued them. But when this happens and everything goes dark, this is really going to affect communities, the quality of life. It's going to affect democracy. This is a very serious fight on a wide range of fronts. The really important thing in what we're talking about when it comes to copyright infringement from us being unable to monetize what we do, that's power. Money is power. Money gives you the ability to stand up and fight these good fights. And that's part of why we need more than we don't need a handout. We need to be able to get to the position where we can operate and make good money and fight these good fights because we have the strength to do it.
All right. So just so I can add, and Lee, I just want to make sure the audience hears this. We, as we define it, is local journalism. Right. That is part of the democratic process. The founding fathers wrote this in. A free, unfettered press is that final check on power. Now, let's enter Facebook and Google. Can you blame them, David? They don't want to pay for this content, right? Duh. I mean, imagine being in an industry where you don't have to pay for the stuff you exploit. I mean, I'm building a building, I get all my materials for free. I'm selling cars, the cars are free. I mean, that doesn't exist, except Facebook and Google need our content. They need journalism because that's what people are searching for or clicking on. Do I have this right, David? So they're trying to avoid paying those tariffs, duh. So what they've done now is thrown a lot of money at our industry. In the last 2 years, what is it up to? $700, $800 million is what I've heard so far globally.
I'm not sure in the US. So a couple things. One of the things they say is that news isn't important to them, right? And we've done a lot of work around this, a lot of econometric work and analysis. It really is important to them. By the way, that's why they're continuing to have these discussions. Because it is it is what brings people to the products. The number of people who wake up in the morning and go onto their products to find out about what's happening in the world is quite high. That then gives those platforms the opportunity to sell them ads against other stuff, collect data, do a number of things. News is a driving thing for a huge number of audiences. So A. B, they want to compensate as little as possible because they were used to the idea that all this stuff's free to them, right? The entry fee is free to them. So as part of that, they don't want any kind of systemic compensation models being created, like I'm advocating for, like this lawsuits would get at. So in order to forestall that, they like to dole out money as they choose, to whom they choose, and on the terms they choose in order to sort of suppress dissent, if you will.
So let's bring in Gretchen. We published an article where we explored the money and where it's going from Facebook and Google, and the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that's being sent to the industry, which, to be fair, Gretchen, I'm gonna let you take it from here, is doing a lot of good, right? That's what you're hearing. So what did you uncover about the money?
Well, that article was really had two different prongs. We wanted to talk to publishers about sort of the moral dilemma of taking money from Facebook and Google with the Facebook Journalism Project and the Google News Initiative, particularly in light of what was happening at the moment, which, if you'll recall, Frances Haugen was testifying in Congress, and we had this daily drip of kind of salacious information about Facebook.
Right.
So that was one thing. We wanted to find out what they were thinking about. But the second thing was, where does the money go? And we talked to people like Brett Wessner at his association and Nancy Lane at hers. And they kind of gave me some, real world examples of how that money is being dispensed. They both agreed from, the perspective of the industry that we do have this strange codependent relationship. But they also saw the good that this money was doing, particularly for publishers like Marie Gilmore, who was cited in that article, who took $5,000 at the time when her newsroom could not figure out how to function with all the COVID shutdowns and so forth. So, but then behind the scenes of that, as I'm talking to publishers, and David will appreciate this, people will pump the brakes. They don't want to talk bad about Facebook. Now, that may be because they've accepted money from Facebook, now Meta, or it could be also that they actually like Facebook as a platform. And that's something I also heard. So it is a very strange relationship that we have with these big tech companies. And it's not our problem with them in the industry is not just content related, but obviously what's happening, as Lee articulated, on the advertising side.
So I think
Go ahead, Lee.
This codependent relationship, it amuses me because here's how the relationship works, and this is borrowing from someone else, but the codependent relationship works so that we provide the blood, they're the vampires, and they keep the blood warm, and they suck it up, and they keep us alive so they have the blood.
Lee, don't hold back. How do you really feel at this moment? I mean, that's quite an analogy. Okay. So what you're saying, Lee, is they're buying us off. Is that what you're, in your opinion? That's why you guys started the lawsuit.
There's absolutely nothing about them that is
altruistic.
Yeah, there's not an altruistic bone in their bodies. There's just not. I mean, everything is done for a purpose, and that's the purpose is, they don't want to see us die. They just don't want to see us thrive. They want to see us barely able to subsist, if that means that they'd have to give up any of their money. But they're not out to see us,
But David,
because it would cost them.
Isn't this short-sighted? If our newsrooms fail, they'll lose the critical content that's getting clicked we know all searches are local. We've read that data. It's all out there. And people don't go to our websites first. They type in the name of the high school football coach, and there our content comes up in the local town. So is this a little short-sighted, or they don't care? They're just day trading it right now because it's trillions and trillions of dollars they'd have to pay for licensing compared to a few $100 million, which is a rounding error.
Oh, it's absolutely short-sighted. I mean, the line I've always used about both of them is, hey, if you got a fake news problem, guess what? We're in the real news business. We are we're the antidote to your problem. Like you should want us to thrive. And by the way, they pay for lots of kinds of content. They both license music content, by the way, and somehow the world hasn't stopped revolving, right? They license lots of sports content. They license celebrity heights and weights, right? But they don't want to do it more than they feel like they have to. And you have to get to these points where if you want, and listen, I have never once criticized a publisher for taking money from Google and Facebook. A bunch of my members do it, and God bless for the $5,000. I would rather her have a sustainable business that lives and thrives in digital spaces and delivers professional content to the people who want it and need it in a sustainable way. And until then, sort of hoping that the Christmas present opens from Facebook and it's got a check in it, it's good. I'm glad that people got the check. That's not what's going to save us.
Gretchen, when you were dialing around and trying to get people on the record, you found it, correct me if I'm wrong, that they really wanted to say, I don't like Facebook and Google, but I really am scared to say that. Is that pretty much what you were, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a publisher tell me at one point when we were talking on background, and she said, I don't want to be associated with any article that criticizes Facebook in any way. And that's pretty much a direct quote. I was just
working. I wanted to say this. I can't get him on the record. I was just I have a few newspaper companies I consult. One gentleman just came from a company that's on the lawsuit. He swears that the moment they signed onto the lawsuit, their SEO dropped. No, I'm not making that accusation. Look, you were laughing. I just started cracking up. I mean, that could have just been fear or something, but I'm scared right now because we have great authority on Google. We publish an article, it's #1 in Google return within an hour. And now I'm worried that I'm going to disappear from the universe.
I got to share this with you. During our conversations with people, we've talked to so many people. One of them was a publisher who'd hired me for a job years ago. He's a publisher elsewhere now, and he said, I just don't want to poke the bear. And I said, you realize the bear is eating you alive. It's eating all of us alive. You don't want to poke it, but it's eating us right now. And I think that's people are worried about upsetting them or something or this happening. Well, if we don't do something, we're not going to have to worry about it at all anymore because we're not going to do it.
David, are there members of yours that are cheering you on from private societies? I mean, it's like we're the Freemasons. We really want this. We don't want anyone to read our. I mean, do you have private conversations where they say, off the record, go get them? I mean, what's going on, David?
I mean, yeah. Listen, look what I do for a living, Mike. I mean, what my members want to do is to have a clear-eyed view. I have to tell you, one of my most irritating things about working in this business is it is so hard to have a conversation about the space without somebody talking about something that happened in 1995 or 2000. Like, just like this incredible, we should have done Craigslist or something. Like, none of that matters. We're here and now, and we create professional journalism that sustains communities. And do we want to have a future for that content or do we not? And that is and how do we do that? And listen, my members are very supportive of our efforts. I run a trade association, so I'm trying to be responsive to what my members need, and what they really need and want, by the way, are productive relationships with these platforms that are sustainable and that allow them to keep doing this business into the future. And we have to change the systems to do that. And by the way, once we get over it, people are like, why didn't we do that a long time ago? But sort of, it's almost like publishers need to somehow be punished for some decision they made in 2000. I don't care what decision they made in 2000. Do you want a future for this business or not? And that's what I'm paid to fight for.
So, yes, Gretchen, go ahead.
I was wondering if David, you could talk a little bit about what's happened in Australia and now in France, where they just recently in France reached a 5-year agreement with the French press, speaking about Google specifically. What's your take on how the legislation has kind of unfolded in both of those countries, and is it a model for what you'd like to see here?
Yeah, so they're different, but they're getting to the same place. So essentially, countries around the world, we may have started this fight, but this fight's happening in a lot of places now. And they've kind of broken down in two ways. Publishers, Mike, you have to give me a minute to lay all this out. Publishers have two major problems. One is a competition problem. There's two companies that control our distribution. And the other problem is really a copyright problem, rights in our content. The Europeans came at it from a copyright perspective, And then they've gone into sort of these structured negotiations, and that's unfolding there, starting with the French. The Australians started with the competition idea, which is this negotiating code. And one of the stupidest things out there is the idea that this was only for Murdoch or only for the big guys in Australia. The one organization to utilize the collective bargaining under the code has been something called Country Press Australia, which is 186 very small community publishers who collectively bargained with Google and got a deal that they were very happy with and is sustaining into the future. So yeah, they're essentially all the countries are moving to a similar perspective. Of course, we have legislation in Congress that we're supporting that would allow for this kind of structured collective negotiation.
Well,
talk
okay.
about that a little bit.
What were you going to say, Gretchen?
I said, could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's important to see what's happening in Congress, kind of parallel to what Lee's.
Well, hold that thought. Is there any data that the Google News Initiative or the Facebook dollars have dwindled in these countries yet? Or is it too soon to tell? Dave, have you heard?
Not that I've seen. I think it's probably too soon.
It's too soon, and these initiatives take time and all that and more. I get it. All right. So what's happening in Congress, David? Is that still you? I mean,
still us. Yeah. So two things: Journalism Competition and Preservation Act (JCPA) would allow for this collective negotiation with the platforms. It's bipartisan in both houses. We've been working on additional terms. Essentially, we got requests to make it involve a lot more detail about how the negotiations would take place and how we'd ensure that everybody benefited. So we're optimistic about that legislation in the coming year. Let me just put it that way. Then that often gets mixed up because there's also a tax credit bill working its way through Congress. That's a totally separate initiative, not really related to the platforms. So we have the JCPA. We're pushing that hard. We're pushing it over the course of the next year. And it's, for want of a better term, it's Australia-like, right? Collective negotiation with the platforms. And then on top of that, you got what Lee's doing, which is these antitrust actions about dominance in the ad tech marketplace.
Now, would one preclude the other? Would Congress be, I mean, if we get the tax credits, would Congress then not care as much, in your humble opinion? Or is the antitrust legislation not even related to that?
I don't think, listen, the tax credit thing is essentially a near-term help for the industry while we solve these bigger problems, which is the marketplace. How do we have a sustainable marketplace? So I don't see them really conflicting at all.
Okay. We have now 200 newspapers. We've got Lee, you're the original company. On board now is AIM, correct? I also saw that we had Leonard Woolsey's company, Southern Newspapers, is now on this as well. I tried to get Leonard on the call, but he's skateboarding somewhere. He said, "Go get him, Tiger." And that's not a quote. I'm just saying. I spoke to him this morning. What if I was a newspaper group and I wanted to be part of this? It's going to be we're going to be publishing a list of who is part of this. It's out there now. What message would you give to them, Lee? I mean, come on board.
My message is get in the game, get in the fight. You can't count on somebody else to do it. That's how we got where we are. We need everybody in this fight. And I'll tell you, I just want to give one moment just to praise David, because I've told him this and I've told you, Mike, this. He is really what our industry needed. He's brought fresh insight. He's brought energy to this issue. He's brought focus to it. And what I would say to everybody else is, don't stand on the sidelines. Get in the game. Pick up the phone. Call Clayton Fitzsimmons at the Fitzsimmons Law Firm.
Well, let's go. Let's do that question now, David. Your organization got a hold of all these different lawsuits, got them combined, right? It's Southern District of New York, correct? Now, this is where the antitrust legislation has been combined, and there's a number of lawyers involved. Should they talk to Danielle first? Do they talk to the Fitzsimmons law firm? Do they talk to Farrell and Fuller? Do they talk to Robert Geller? Do they talk to Herman Jones? Do they talk to all? if I was a publisher, do I just talk to you, David, first, or Lee? What advice do you give for a publisher that wants to jump on this lawsuit?
Yeah, the decision to join the lawsuit or not is a individual publisher thing, and we've been directing folks to the lawyers involved, right? So Fitzsimmons being an example of that. What we're really been doing is, first of all, we did support consolidation in New York because Google wanted it in California, and that would not have been a good idea. Okay, and also we've been providing sort of the intellectual and statistical backdrop to a lot of it. We had a white paper about Google's use of content that has supported the lawsuit and the rest. So we've been directing folks to the law firms, and folks can either contact Lee, or if you contact Danielle Coffey, she's got the whole list of the firms involved. We're not really been recommending, we've just been connecting folks with the law firms.
Every publisher in America should read that white paper. If anybody who hasn't should. It's outstanding, and it provided a lot of the material for our claim and for others. Everybody should read that, and everybody should know you just cannot afford to stand idly by and wait for somebody else to do it, because the more people who are involved, the more people who are attacking this, and this is what we need to do. We need to be aggressive. We can't stand idly by and hope things are going to get better. They are not getting better, and they're not going to get better unless we all act.
Well, and I think David summed it up. I mean, images are licensed. Music is licensed. It's survived over 100 years. I can't put a tune in the background of a YouTube video without it instantly finding who composed it and saying there's a licensing agreement here. You can't do that. This is what we're simply saying is the licensing of the content we create. So if someone is monetizing it, then the composer, the journalist, gets compensated. Just like I can't run a bar and play a movie on a screen and say, have a beer and watch this movie. That movie is a licensed piece of content if I'm monetizing, and I've got to get permission. We're going to start a page. It's up right now. It is at editorandpublisher.com/antitrust, because there is no one-stop place where all these white papers are right now, where all these content, I'm going to have every lawyer listed. I'm going to have the white paper from David. I'm going to have any news that's currently coming out. We're going to maintain a live, dynamic list of who's on board, because I don't want to hide that, because it's public knowledge anyway. But we're urging publishers. I guess that's what this is all about. As you would say, Lee, I mean, don't get eaten by the bear. You only had two good metaphors. Do you have a third you want to throw in?
I could go on all.
Yeah, I bet he's got a lot more than that, Mike. Yeah. Just FYI.
No, but I mean, it's time to stand up and say, look, we're okay. Facebook and Google, Gretchen, you did a good report on that, are supplying some money, helping the local journalism industry. But David's point is, I'm just bringing it all home now, if you want a sustainable business that's going to last another 100 years, don't let people exploit your content. End of story. Correct, David? That's it.
Correct. I'm gonna quote you now, Mike, all the time. Exactly. I mean, that's exactly correct. Listen, this is a natural thing that happens when you have big disruptions in the industry. We controlled our distribution for hundreds of years. By the way, if you can control your distribution, that's a really good thing. Do that. We don't anymore. Right. So we need because when you control it, you only hand it to who pays for it, right? Now we don't control the distribution, so we need a new system that actually returns the value back.
David, you and I even chatted about when I was lobbying in D.C. as president of the Maine Broadcasters. I was going to George Mitchell and Bill Cohen, two very powerful senators back then, on retransmission consent and must carry. If a cable company is monetizing a local broadcast signal, they should be compensated for it, and we won that one. I mean, on behalf of
again, another antecedent. Local broadcast had free distribution.
Right.
For a long time. They didn't pay anybody for the distribution. They just cranked, right? Then the cable companies, a handful, took control of that distribution. Then they had about a 15-year fight for cable retrans, but that's exactly what that is. It's returning value back to the content creators, because somebody else controls whether people see what you do or not, and whether you're on channel 8 or channel 888, right? And whether it's seen at all. So that's exactly what that was.
If you're on Hulu now, that same legislation survives. From the piano roll to Spotify. Back to another analogy. We just bring it all home. Lee, you're fighting the good fight there.
Another one. Another metaphor. Even a drug dealer knows he needs to control his distribution.
Yeah.
There's the pull quote of the day. We got it. Lee, thank you for not letting us down. Everybody stay healthy. Once again, editorandpublisher.com/antitrust. We'll keep populating the page. Gretchen's going to be chasing more and more stories with the rest of the team. Lee, you're going to keep up the fight. And David, thank you for the hard effort you're doing for us, especially in coordinating all this on behalf of the industry. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciate it.